Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. In the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of living nature, of which we're a part, with deep gratitude to all of our ancestors that have brought us to the present moment, I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we begin a 10-day program on nonviolence. You know, it's a very deep issue, this question of how humans in society govern ourselves, how we interact with one another simply as human beings and all part of the same species, Homo sapiens. And if you've read the book, The Dawn of Everything by David Grieder and David Wennemar, you'll know that over the eons of time, humans have experimented in all kinds of ways of self-governance, all kinds of ways of interacting with one another, both in community and between communities. And there's no set way that has been handed down by a divine being. It's just an experimentation that we humans have made of ourselves. And the irony, which no one, as far as I know, has ever satisfactorily explained, is that somehow we have evolved probably the most coercive and dysfunctional ways of governance and interactivity. We commit all kinds of violence against each other, against the earth. We maintain rigid hierarchical structures. We have a patriarchal model. We suppress women, we suppress animals, we suppress nature. And this opportunity, this ideal of getting along with each other without doing harm, has always seemed to be present, but also elusive, as violence seems to be the default mechanism for personal and collective relationships over the thousands of years of history, intensified to the present day, until the violence that we are exercising between ourselves and on the earth has gotten to such an egregious point that we're about ready to self-destruct. So for the next 10 days, we want to look at how we can be more nonviolent with one another, how we can be more creative with one another, how we can do no harm. And in the spirit of affirming the mutuality of our lives, be much more innocent, I would say, with one another, more compassionate, more loving, more accepting of diversity. That is the great task of humankind. And we've brought together an extraordinary array of people that have dedicated their lives to nonviolence. And we're going to start today with just defining what it is. And then over the next 10 days, we're going to explore different domains. And it's all around a movie that is coming out called The Third Harmony, which we'll get to in a few minutes. But before we dive into this 10-day program, we want to pause, as we always do, for Humanity Rising, and let us just breathe together. If the whole world was breathing together and feeling heart coherence, nonviolence would naturally ensue. So every day as we begin Humanity Rising, for those of you who are new, we breathe together. And so in a moment, you're going to see an art card, which is really the orbital pathway of Venus and the Earth around the sun that creates a five-pointed lotus blossom, a five-pointed star. And then you're going to hear some tones. And at the first tone, You breathe in and you breathe in for about 5.5 seconds. And then slowly, when you hear the next tone, just breathe out for 5.5 seconds, and then breathe in and breathe out for 15 breaths. And then we will commence our program. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Georg? Thank you, everyone. When you breathe to this 5.5 inhalation, 5.5 second exhalation, according to the latest science, you're optimizing every organ, every system in your body, especially your heart-brain coherence. In a world spinning out of control, in a world full of violence, just breathing in this way optimizes all those aspects of yourself that we all need to navigate in a hyper-complex world. So that's why we do it on Humanity Rising, to bring us all together as one. So it's my great pleasure to introduce my good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington, who's the convener of this program for the next 10 days. He has a passion for nonviolence. He has a passion for ecology. He's the founder and CEO of Endangered Global. He's convened several sessions over the last year on Humanity Rising on endangered species, which includes the human species and about 1 million other species. He's a very successful business executive that consults and coaches people around the world. He has Eddington Advisory Services, but mostly he's a scholar and a passionate citizen for preserving our endangered environment and for how we as humans can interact more nonviolently and creatively and compassionately together at this critical time. Before Tom comes on, we're going to just play the 2-minute trailer of the Third Harmony, of which he's the executive producer. You'll remember that he also was an executive producer for Connecting the Dots, the extraordinary program that we had last year around mental health and youth that brought young people from all over the world together to talk about the challenges of what is happening around the world and the increased stress that young people are suffering and how they can navigate in a more holistic way. So Tom has done quite a bit for the advancement of Humanity Rising as a general principle, not just the program, but just for how humanity can rise at this extraordinary time. So we'll play the video and then Tom will take the program from there.
It seems like every one of us has this big library of humanity and nonviolence inside him.
One thing we have in common as individuals, as human beings, is the power to show love. The basis of nonviolence is love.
Governments have spent billions and billions of dollars getting violent science right in the past 400 years. And I think that it's time that we invest some time and energy into alternatives.
Our evolutionary mandate is to move into the peaceful cooperation because we see now that we're destroying our own infrastructure, we're destroying the planet we depend on.
If you start from the assumption that everybody has a good core in their nature, that we're all deeply interconnected, that there is no problem which cannot be resolved to the benefit of all parties. If you start with those assumptions, and even if you don't believe them, you take them on as a hypothesis, as assumptions, and you test them, and you find out that it works.
We have to think big. Sojourner Truth didn't think small, Martin Luther King didn't, Gandhi didn't. They had big, bold ideas.
Seeing it firsthand, seeing the power of nonviolence, and feeling we really have the power to make history, to change history.
Thank you, Jim. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to be co-hosting with my dear friend and colleague, Michael Nagler, not only the writer and the producer of the Third Harmony film, but more importantly, one of the leading thinkers and researchers and scholars in nonviolence. and most importantly to me, a very dear friend. Michael was a professor of classics and comparative literature and emeritus at the University of California, where he taught in the Peace and Conflict Studies program that he founded on that campus in the 1970s. In addition to teaching at Berkeley, Michael speaks very frequently in the media, in the general public on issues of peace and nonviolence. He's done presentations all over the world for the Blue Mountain Center of Meditation. Michael's written 6 books and contributes articles frequently to Tikkun and Yes magazine and other progressive journals. He's consulted with the U.S. Institute of Peace and many organizations and projects dealing with nonviolence and world peace. Michael's the founder and president of the Meta Center and director of, as I mentioned, of the Third Harmony film. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, Tom. I guess I'll spend the rest of my life trying to live up to that introduction.
Well, you won't have any trouble with that at all, I suspect. And then and joining us today is Ela Gandhi. Ela is a socio-political activist. She qualified as a social worker and engaged in child and family welfare in the child and family welfare field. She now manages 2 family organizations. Her work is aimed at promoting a culture of nonviolence generally, but specifically at the historic Gandhi ashram, known as the Phoenix Settlement, where she was born and lives, and is joining us today from Durban. So welcome, Ela.
Thank you.
So we've got a wonderful topic today, Michael and Ela, where we're going to talk about nonviolence and sort of set the stage for the next 2 weeks and help our audience really understand where nonviolence derives its power and hopefully dispel some misconceptions of nonviolence, and we have an opportunity to really set the stage for the next 2 weeks. So I'll turn it over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm going to give the honor of starting us off today to my dear friend Ela Gandhi, who, in addition to everything that you mentioned, Tom, is the Mahatma's granddaughter. And I have something in common with you, Ela. You may not have realized that we've both written children's books about Gandhi. Yours is called The Essential Values of Mahatma Gandhi. Ours was called Gandhi Searches for Truth. But enough about children's books. I think I'd like to hear your approach to this crucial topic that Tom has delineated for the morning. Where does nonviolence derive its power? What is it exactly? Ela, could you please address us?
Sure. I'm also learning. So I'm very happy to be part of this discussion. And I've been fortunate as, granddaughter of Gandhiji to have lived on an ashram and brought up there by my parents who were, also scholars of Gandhian ideas. So the fortunate aspect is the fact that, we lived that discipline from early childhood. And by, so doing, it becomes a part of your nature. It becomes part of yourself. And so it really is a fortune and a privilege to have been able to live that kind of life. So for me, nonviolence, from early childhood has been a way of life. It's not just nonviolence that happens now and again, but it's a way of life so that you begin to learn to respond to various situations in life with a nonviolent approach. Now, as I said, that it isn't as simple as I'm saying it, because I have also experienced in my own lifetime that whilst the discipline of this kind of life becomes part of one's life, it's not always easy to react in a nonviolent way to conflict. So that is something that is we are constantly learning. Even my grandfather said so, that to his last day, he was still learning. And so are all of us. We are learning all the time how to react, how to, control the base emotions that are within us. Whilst, as we showed in this third harmony, we have the heart and the beautiful emotion of love and compassion and humanity and so on. But we also have that base emotion within us. And at times, that emotion comes out. So that whole question of Jekyll and Hyde personality, it is within all of us. And we have to learn to make the good part of within us stronger. And that happens through discipline, through education, through learning, throughout life, because learning takes place at every experience in your life. And so through those experiences, you learn to react in a particular way to particular situations. So that is the power, I think, that one derives, that makes you nonviolent. And that power is something that you constantly develop within yourself. So it is an inner power, it's within you. The spirit is within you, and through that, through the discipline that we learn, we begin to strengthen that spirit within us. And that helps us to react in a nonviolent way to situations. So, yeah, that's the first thing that we have to learn. And it's something that, people think, why do I have to learn nonviolence? Or, is it going to teach me something new? But, experience has taught us all that learning is important. Learning even your spirituality, strengthening the spirituality within yourself is important, because that spirituality gets weak at times with situations. And how do you strengthen that? So it is about learning, about discussing, about learning from others, learning from experience, and so on. So, all the time we are growing, we are strengthening ourselves, and we are learning these aspects. So that's my first point, that it is important to learn, and it is important to have that discipline, and that doesn't take place in one day or a few days, but it is a lifelong learning process. So that's the first point. The second point, I think, is that in any conflict, like we were talking about war and so on, in that situation, if we want to intervene with nonviolence, with the nonviolent method, then there has to be a moral high ground. We have to ensure that what we are talking about comes within that purview of morality, of ethics, and therefore we have to have that discipline within us as well. And that discipline comes with humility, with a non-judgmental attitude, with compassion and understanding, because there isn't any one truth in the world. We are all looking for the truth, but there isn't one truth. There are many truths, and people see them from their own perspectives, and those perspectives are many. And therefore, it is, we have to cultivate a non-judgmental attitude in order to accept that there are many truths, that, listen to other people, not to come to the table with the idea that you have all the answers, but rather to come to the table to be able to listen, and with humility, with compassion, to understand each other and grow that understanding, and come with the actual, principles that we learn through this, learning of nonviolence, because there are some basic principles. And Martin Luther King has pointed them out, Gandhi has pointed them out. And therefore, those basic principles have to be adhered to. Those are the parameters that we create, and those are the parameters that give us that moral high ground. Because if we don't have the moral high ground on our side, what is the power that we come with? Power lies in many different things. Power lies in being strong. Power lies in having lots of weapons. Power lies in having money, having lot of people following us. Power lies in the strength of having all these people who would accept what you are saying, or accept the truth that, that has been worked out. So there is that power in having people behind you. And to develop that power, that ethic and morality gives you the power, and it gives you the following. It gives you that strength. Whether it is the media, whether it is people, all that grows through this ethics and morality that we put forward. If we don't have that, if we don't have those two things to put on the table, then we lose the backing of people, we lose the backing of publicity, we lose the backing of any power, of having any power. We actually weaken ourselves if we don't come with those moral principles and ethics. So I think that I'm going to leave it at that. There are lots of things that are mentioned by Gandhiji, by Martin Luther King and other people, which are important aspects of learning how to lead a nonviolent life. But I'm just today mentioning these two things, the moral and ethical principle that's important, and the fact that you are learning all the time. Learning how to live a non-violent way of life. So I'll leave it at those two aspects.
Thank you for sharing the two principles. I'm curious where, you know, each of us as human beings have needs, and oftentimes those needs will help shape our truth and our understanding of the world. And so I'd be curious to hear you respond to where our individual needs fit into the moral high ground and the realization that nonviolence is a lifelong practice.
So I think for me, the that aspect of needs, you know, has been shown by Gandhiji when he decided to leave his home in an urban area in the city and establish the Phoenix Ashram, which is the first ashram that he established. And it was the first time that he thought that I have to change my lifestyle. So how do I change my lifestyle? And in that change, and in what he did at the Phoenix Ashram, are the basics of the needs that people have, the common human needs that people have, and the fact that it is each one of us' responsibility to ensure that those common human needs are met. That is our responsibility, and we need to take on that responsibility. So when Pope Francis talks about the economy of solidarity, to me, that is what I understand to be the economy of solidarity. That when you see a person in need, there are different needs that people have, you know, need to have a house and shelter, need to have education, need to have health care, need to have work and dignity, all those kinds of things. And it's us as human beings that can come to the table and ensure that everybody's needs, those common human needs, are met. And once those common human needs are met, fundamental needs, then there will be less conflict in the world than we see at present. There will be, in my opinion, less environmental degradation, because once you know, you begin to look at these common human needs, and you begin to look at it from the point of view that we have to come together, that we are actually each other's keepers. The Bible says so, all our scriptures say so, that we are responsible for the world, for others in the world. And if we take on that responsibility seriously, then the world will be a different place. So I think that, yeah, that's a fundamental thing. And it has been depicted in Gandhiji's life when he changed his life from living in the city to living in a rural area, living in a communal settlement, looking after each other, everyone respecting each other. You have shared spirituality where you respect each other's beliefs, and you have no problem in sharing each other's beliefs. So they used to sing the hymns together, no matter which religious sector you know, you belong to, but everybody sang the hymns together. Everybody prayed together and lived together men, women, children, different race groups, different religious groups. So all that diversity, those diversities are human-made diversities. And if you break down those diversities and learn to live together, it is completely changing your mindset, changing your lifestyle, and so on.
One of the questions in the chat, or it's a comment, refers to your what you shared about standing on the moral high ground, and the observation that's shared is it implies one can look down on others, and that judgment is not helpful. And so I'm wondering if you can make the distinction between standing on the moral high ground without judgment.
Yeah. So we don't judge other people. But when we talk about moral high ground, morality and ethics, we look at not what is good for me, but what is good for all. Gandhiji talked about Sarvodaya, the good of all people. And when you are looking at the good of all, then there's immediately a change in perspective. And the way people look at you, there's a change, because you are not going there because you are going to benefit from any changes or whatever negotiations that are taking place. It's not your personal change, but it is a change for the good of all people. And, and you don't have the answer to create the good of all people. You go with humility, that let's work out how we can look at a way to resolve the conflict situation so that we can meet the needs of all the people, so that we can look at good of all. That immediately changes that arrogance of, okay, I have the truth, I have the moral high ground. The moral high ground are people and their needs. That is the moral high ground. And that mustn't be compromised in any way, because it immediately gets compromised when we say that, okay, this is good for me. I'm going to benefit from this deal, whatever the deal is. The minute it takes that turn, that I'm going to benefit from it, then there's no moral high ground anymore. It goes down. So that is what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. Michael, do you want to weigh in?
Yes, I can weigh in, Tom. That I really, really liked your remarks, as I always do. And I wanted to comment on one thing you said and make a slight change, which I'm pretty sure you'll agree with. You said that eventually nonviolence becomes part of our nature, but in reality, nonviolence is our nature. It's been there all along. So I knew you would agree. So what we can say, and I think this is a way of putting what you said so nicely, is that it becomes part of our second nature. In other words, we respond spontaneously with nonviolence to any situation, any kind of challenge. So what we're doing at that point is overcoming our conditioning and reaching down into our deepest nature. And that's where the tremendous happiness and fulfillment comes from. This is an unpleasant statistic, but I feel I should mention it at this point. The amount of suicides that are going on among former servicemen and women in the United States is absolutely appalling. And it at least shows us something, if we would only learn it. And it shows us that violence, as the word implies, violence violates our inner nature. It violates who we are. And we cannot shed that moral awareness. it's ingrained in us, and so people are going to respond that way. In the field of nonviolence, as far as I know, nobody has committed nobody has committed suicide. Self-immolation might occasionally happen, but not that kind of despair that we see when people go into violence. So that's very eloquent, kind of heavy to think about.
Can I respond to that?
Tom, can she respond?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I agree with you entirely, Michael, that, violence is certainly not our nature. And in fact, every time we commit violence, we are dehumanizing ourselves. We can't, we ourselves find that we can't live with a violent act. But when we have done something non-violently, we feel proud of ourselves. We feel the elation within ourselves, and you feel good about yourself. And I mean, without being, arrogant, one feels that, you are able to achieve much more through nonviolent ways, both for the community, but also for yourself.
Absolutely.
Because you feel good about yourself. The minute you commit violence, you don't feel good about yourself. And that is the situation. And I think people need to know that. What society is doing, however, is that we are projecting that macho image in society. And I mean, that is one of the reasons why we have gender-based violence, growing incidents of gender-based violence, of violent attacks on people as well, and so on. And that is because, we create the atmosphere or the, a society where people feel that the stronger you are physically strong and you can beat somebody up, that you've done something good. People tell you you've done something good. But I know this for a fact because as a social worker, I've spoken to people. And the person who commits that act doesn't feel that good. People will tell them, you've won, you're a strong person. You've got big muscles and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, once you've committed an act, you don't feel good about it. So we should, look at societal conditioning that people have gone through. And I think that that's very important from early childhood, that we don't create that kind of perception.
Michael, picking up on a comment you made about people in the military, one of the guests on Humanity Rising earlier this year, we did a program on the global epidemic of adolescent anxiety, depression, and suicide. She's Dr. Lisa Miller from Columbia University has been doing research and work with the U.S. Army, where bringing spiritual practices to the Army personnel have reduced suicide rates by 28%.
Wonderful.
And so picking up on that, I'm wondering, to your comment, and I would ask you both to respond, is the having a spiritual practice, is that returning us to helping us see that our nonviolent nature is our core nature?
That is precisely what spiritual practice is about. It is to enable us to, breaststroke through all the debris of accumulated conditioning, and especially nowadays, the conditioning of the mass media, and get back to our basic, our fundamental nature. And that's a very satisfactory thing to do. Now, of course, in the United States, there hasn't been the continuous tradition of spirituality that you see developed, for example, in India. In fact, India is kind of outstanding without any example in that way. So that when this terrific need for spirituality became acute in the 1960s, you saw people going all over the map without any guidance. And I mention this because I don't want people to think that because someone says, I meditate or I'm spiritual, that they're necessarily doing it correctly. Just as what Ela said about nonviolence, you can't just pick up a placard and walk out on the street and say, I am nonviolent. It requires knowledge, training, practice. So it is with spiritual practice as well. But I used to say to my students when I was teaching at Berkeley that there will be no peace without nonviolence. And they would say, and you also believe that there'll be no nonviolence without meditation. So I still stand on that platform, I guess.
And Ela, how about from your perspective, the spirituality piece?
Mm-hmm.
I think spirituality is very important because it helps people to look within themselves. I think if spirituality, with spirituality comes some understanding as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there are different types of understanding. Now, if you see, for instance, what has happened in some, in our country, in our neighboring countries and so on, when they go to war or when they commit violence, for instance, the terrible torture that, we are subjected to sometimes during the apartheid regime. A lot of us were subjected to torture. Now that torture, the person who subjected the people to torture had a mental conditioning that these are subhumans, that these are people, just as you would kill a snake, you kill a human being because that human being is a snake, is a cockroach. It's been told that in Rwanda, that's what they said, that these people are cockroaches and they have to be killed. So when you begin to, satisfy yourself that you haven't done something wrong, then that spirituality is not really helping to bring about a morally sound person. So we've got to point out that your understanding was wrong, that this person is a human being like any one of us, and that you shouldn't have actually done what you did. But we all make mistakes. And I mean, that is also within our faith. Our faith does talk about forgiveness, about accepting that you have done something wrong and changing. The most important thing is the change. You have done something wrong, don't do it again. Accept that. And if we can do that, then yes, and prevent people from committing suicide, then it's good. But if we say that, look what you've done, you did it for your country and it's okay and carry on, then you're not doing something that's just and moral. So yeah.
Thank you. One of the comments posed in the chat is it's addressed in part, Michael, in the film The Third Harmony, that we need harmony with ourselves, with each other, and with nature. But there's a question around selfishness and where does that fit in the context of nonviolence? And I'll ask a follow-up question, but I'd like to have the two of you speak to that first.
I regard selfishness as an illusion. which is a perfectly understandable one. The concern for and desire for one's own well-being seems to not work. When we turn ourselves inside out, and this is a strange thing, but it's true and we can all experience. When we turn ourselves inside out and dedicate ourselves to the well-being of others, it's not a zero-sum game. They improve to some extent, we improve to some extent. So this is the paradox, and all the spiritual traditions have known this, that the less we seek our own well-being as a separate individual, the more we thrive and the more we actually guarantee our well-being. So I hope I'm making this clear. It's by forgetting about ourselves that we flourish. Let me just leave it that way.
And how about for you, Ela?
I think again, it's it's natural for all of us to want certain things for ourselves, that we want to improve your life, you want to be happy, and happiness comes from, again, many things. You know, how do you measure happiness? Is it because you have many possessions, or does happiness come from loving people, helping people? Where does your happiness come from? So this is, again, something that one needs to condition oneself to, in order to see that happiness is not only having, hundreds of pairs of shoes, or, designer clothes, or things like that. There are other things that are more important in life which make you happy. So that's the one thing, those illusions that are created in our minds. So that selfishness of wanting to do something to make yourself happy is within all of us. Whatever way we want to make ourselves happy, but that is within us. It's a normal thing for all human beings. Mm-hmm. So how you practice that is the important thing. How do you control it? How do you use it? And how do you don't have to make yourself miserable. Gandhiji said you don't have to go into the mountains to find God. You can find God within people. And so, in my belief, I feel that, we, in this process of satisfying yourself, you need to be circumspect, that you don't find satisfaction by dispossessing other people. Mm-hmm. There is a sufficiency in the world, Gandhiji said, to meet the needs of everyone, but not the greed of anyone. So the minute that selfishness becomes greed, then it's not good selfishness. But so I believe that there is good selfishness and bad selfishness. I'm not sure if the terminology is correct, but I think that we do need to make ourselves happy in order to live. And to make yourself happy, you can go for a walk, you can meditate, you can do a lot of things. You don't have to take away some possession that other people, that belongs to other people, to make yourself happy.
Thank you both. There's a question in the chat around the two hands of nonviolence, and we speak to that in the film, Michael, and it goes to the topic of today about, for many people, when they think about nonviolence and this notion that there's actually power derived from nonviolence, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what is nonviolence. And so I'm wondering if the two of you could speak to the two hands of nonviolence and what is where does nonviolence derive power? Because that perception that there's no power in nonviolence is not accurate.
Hardly. Now, it's interesting that quote about the two hands of nonviolence comes from Barbara Deming. And she was the first person that I was going to quote from in my presentation this morning. But the model is very simple and very useful, that we should always approach a disagreement or something that's escalated to something worse than a disagreement, a conflict where we actually, one party wants the unhappiness of another, with what Barbara Deming called the two hands of nonviolence. With one hand, we're saying, I will not put up with your injustice. But the critical thing is that the other hand is saying, but I am open to you as a human being. And Ila, you were talking about this also, that the critical thing in nonviolence is the ability to separate the person from the deed. In cases where you have to defy the deed, but you are never against the true well-being of the person. That's where nonviolence really gets its power.
Ila?
Yeah, I agree with what Michael has said. And I think that, nonviolence, if we were to look at it, requires far more courage than violence does. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because whatever we do it with, a lot of courage and resilience. So that's the one thing about nonviolence. But the other thing is that in using nonviolent methodology, you are saying that you are not going to cooperate with injustice, with evil. You're not going to cooperate. And that non-cooperation with evil is what Gandhiji practiced, what nonviolent practitioners do. So it is a direct action. It's not inaction. That is why Gandhiji felt that, it's not passive. It's not a passive resistance. It's an active resistance to violence. So nonviolence, although it is and both, I think Martin Luther King and Gandhiji removed the hyphen that separates the non from violence. They made it into one word, nonviolence, because it's not non-something, it is a positive thing, and that positive thing is love. And that's why you love the person, but you hate the deed. You love the person, but that deed is wrong, and you try to show the person, change the person through love. You try to bring about a change in that person, to see that what he or she is doing is wrong and needs to change.
Yeah, thank you. Michael, you want to pick up on that comment and share some of the information that you prepared for today?
Thank you, Tom. Yes, that's. I would love to do that. I mentioned that I'm going to start with a quote from Barbara Deming, the one who gave us that model of the two hands of nonviolence. But she was one of the really early explorers of nonviolence in this country, in America. And she said, quote, "Nonviolence is an experiment, one that has just begun." And of course, this is reminiscent of what Gandhi called his experiments with truth, which was his way of characterizing his whole life. It's the title of his autobiography, was the story of my experiments with truth. So our topic for these 10 exhilarating days is going to be nothing less than what Gandhi called the greatest force at the disposal of mankind. Now, of course, when he said that, it was understood that it was a benevolent force, because from his background, good, the good is real, and evil is only appearance. That's a critical element in his approach to life. The term sat in Sanskrit, which means being, which means truth, also means that which is good. So his statement, he said that nonviolence is greater than the atomic bomb because it is a power that operates on a different level. And it with kind of a pun in Sanskrit, we could say the power of the Atman is greater than the power of the atom. The Atman being the core self of the human being, which critically is the same as the self in every other living thing, every sentient being. So my description of this opening session, I said what we're going to be trying to do is to engage the positive energies latent within every one of us as human beings. We want to think about the implications of this, that we have positive energies in us by virtue of being human. And I would go further, as Gandhi did, and say that these are the fundamental energies. Now, this involves various ways of looking at a person that may not be familiar to us. So I think that it involves a different and better image of who we are. And that we really need to be grounded in a different, more accurate image of what is a human being in order to practice nonviolence correctly. So to pick up on Gandhiji's comment that it's the greatest force that we've been endowed with, I would say that alas, it's also the most neglected at the moment. And that is the real predicament of our time that Jim referred to in his opening remarks. Because it's the least known, it is also the least used. And the goal of this conference is to try to correct that. Now, happily, if you look back over the last 20 years, and Erica Chenoweth does this very well in the film, you see that nonviolence really is expanding since Gandhiji's time. He said, nonviolence has come among human beings, it will live. And that is now happening in a very dramatic way. In the film, Erica says, we see more episodes of nonviolent action in the last decade than throughout the 1990s. And there are various aspects of this expansion, this growth, both theoretical and practical. For example, as Tom referenced the fact that I founded the Peace and Conflict Studies program when I was teaching at Berkeley, back then we were almost the only such program in the country. And there's now 190 of them and counting at my last count. And so a whole new field has come into existence of nonviolence research, which Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan and many others, Stellan Windhagen at Amherst, are very, very good exemplars of. And our understanding of nonviolence, this is quite important, our understanding of what it really is also growing. So when this project of education, of exploration research started, it was started by Gene Sharp at Harvard, but he operated with only one set of examples of nonviolence, namely an insurrectionary movement against an unacceptable regime. God knows there's room for that in the world. We're seeing that in Iran and in many places today. But it's quite important for us to realize that this is only one little scintilla, one little spark of what nonviolence can do for us. So he left open, Gene Sharp left open a question that has become of primary importance to us. And that is, when you do something nonviolent, was it a strategic choice or was it a matter of principle? So since then, we speak about these two things as strategic nonviolence or principled nonviolence. And it's critical to realize that they're very different phenomena. Strategic nonviolence is the hyphenated kind, Tom, that you referred to. And principled nonviolence is the unhyphenated kind. And we also talk a lot nowadays about the new story of human nature, that we are not, Darwinian fragments competing against one another, but spiritual beings striving to complete one another. And so therefore, principled nonviolence becomes critically important because it is the only kind that really does that. You can do strategic nonviolence, and it can often succeed in the old model of you against me, of life being a zero-sum game and a struggle. You can do that, and any day it's better than doing violence. But I'm going to say you're only just beginning to touch the hem of the garment of what nonviolence can truly be. In other words, principled nonviolence changes the entire social field, whereas strategic nonviolence operates within the existing field. So this is an important distinction that I've come to adopt, and I want to leave you with. So I want to give you a couple of examples. One of the greatest practitioners of nonviolence in our age, it was Danilo Dolci, who was called the Sicilian Gandhi, Il Gandhi Siciliano. And he passed on in 1997. He was originally an architect in Milan, doing very, very well. Went down to Sicily, to Palermo for a vacation, saw the poverty, and said, I'm going to stay here and take care of this. So he spent the rest of his life fighting two things: poverty of the Sicilian peasants and the mafia. To take on the mafia requires a certain amount of courage, I would say, speaking as a New Yorker. So brilliantly enough, Danilo actually won. His first struggle was to create a dam called the Jato Dam, which would provide water for irrigation for these farmers and vastly improve their lot. Now, the mafia was against that because they wanted people to be in poverty so they could control them, though they probably didn't go around saying that. So when Danilo got this dam, now at the same time, he was also a school teacher, and he was teaching the children of the mafiosi. So he had some credibility with them. See, that's the other hand. I'm not rejecting your whole gene pool because your father is in the mafia. So he was on speaking terms with them. And when he created this dam, much to their dismay, they came to him and they said, okay, Danilo, now you've won. Now you have all the water. Very strategic nonviolence, old story kind of viewpoint. Now, what Danilo immediately and it spontaneously said is, no, now we have all the water. That the water is for everyone. It's for the uplift of the entire community. So this is what I'm calling a principled nonviolence approach, which is another way really of looking at those two hands of nonviolence, because in principled nonviolence, you're acting in such a way that humanity actually grows, actually rises, if I may say so, and actually approaches its own destiny. So that's an example of principled nonviolence. Just to throw that into relief, I'll give you an example of strategic nonviolence, not that I'm advocating it, but I will say, it's better than violence. In the early years of the recent Intifada in Palestine, in the 1990s, one of the Palestinians who wanted to advocate that the Palestinians adopt nonviolence, which they did, mostly strategic nonviolence, because I should say that what Danilo Dolci did and principled nonviolence is still very rare in our world. That's the paradox. It's our inner nature but it has yet to really manifest itself. And so one of the Palestinians, talking to his colleagues, his fellow countrymen, said, well, let's try nonviolence. And if it doesn't work, we'll just go pick up arms and go back to violence. So that's strategic nonviolence for you. And you can see why I'm okay with it, but not enthusiastic about it. And it does bring up another critical topic that I address in my book, The Third Harmony. And that is, what do we actually mean by work? Do we mean I got what I wanted in that situation and devil take the hindmost? Or do I mean that I was able to elevate the situation to some degree? And we can state as a principle that violence sometimes works. There's no question about that. Even the most hideous violence that Russia is exerting right now, for example, against Ukraine, it's gained them some territory. So it does work in that respect. But at the same time, the suicide rates are rising in Russia. 1,300 people have been arrested recently for protesting. So we can say that violence sometimes works, i.e., gets you what you want, but it never does good work. Whereas principled nonviolence sometimes works. I mean, sometimes it doesn't seem to work. I'm thinking of the case of like an American volunteer in Palestine who there was an Israeli settler who was very, very angry. The American fellow reached out his hand. He says, "Hi, my name is so-and-so." And the settler, who was, in a really bad state, kicked him into the gutter and said, "My name is hate." So that's an example of principled nonviolence that didn't work, but it did good work. It affected that person, even though it didn't necessarily show in the immediate term. So the great thing about getting to this vision of principled nonviolence, non-hyphenated, if you will, is that we can easily see that nonviolence can be applied across the board. And Ela was speaking to this very, very well. It's in the relationships of person to person, group to group, humanity to the natural environment. And that experiment, as Barbara Deming said, is just beginning. So throughout the rest of this summit, we're going to share with you only a few representative examples of this potentially earth-shaking development. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, he's going to take 10 days to show us just a few examples. Well, that is the point. This thing is really, really expanding. And at some point in glorious time in the future, it's going to take precedence over violence. And it's going to become, for many people, and God help us, even for some governments, the default, instead of the default being violence, as Ela pointed out earlier. So how can we go about learning this thing? Well, in the days to come, as we're giving you some examples, quoting from people who are the great practitioners in our day, I would say we can look at who are the people, who are the organizations, what are the actions, what are the campaigns, and of course, critically, what are the resources? And this will help us to build up finally a change in our culture. I don't know if you look at Truth Out, but they recently had an article, I'm quoting the title of the article, "Dark Money School Groups Are Trying to Buy the Midterm Elections for the GOP." Now, this is where the term old story and new story come in. What we mean by story is our history. That is, history is an impossibly vast, infinite field of events. What we do is make a highly selected version of those events. and say, this is our history, this is where we came from. Now, what is motivating that selection? That's what's critically important. If you recognize that nonviolence is the primary identity of the human being, you will make a very different selection than, for example, what I was taught as quote history in history books, which are leapfrogging from one war to the next without bothering to talk about social progress. And you know, tragically enough, back then, as you can tell, you know, my experience in grade school was quite a while ago. I basically never heard of Gandhi until he was assassinated, and then the story appeared on the cover of Life magazine. But now that situation is changing wonderfully. So what we want to do is come away informed and inspired. That will motivate us. And here I'm giving the last words to Gandhi, quite appropriately. He said, it will motivate us to take part in the experiment, the great experiment that Barbara Deming referred to. And as we say at the Meta Center, it will enable us to practice nonviolence more safely and more effectively. Those are the words, Tom, that I think I'd like to leave us with this morning. Eager to hear people's comments.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Ela?
Okay, so I agree entirely with what Michael has said. I think that, you know, the time has come when we really need to look at what does nonviolence really mean. And to, whilst we look at, you know, the organized confrontations or whatever one would call it, against injustices in the world in nonviolent, using nonviolent means, we also need to look at how have we changed ourselves. Because I think that, you know, nonviolence as a way of life is the most important thing. Because if we don't make nonviolence a way of life for ourselves, then when we are confronting injustices, you replace one tyrant with another tyrant. You are not replacing the one kind of government with a more humane government, because we are keeping that, you know, the whole ideology intact. We are only changing the persons behind that, the people who are, you know, ruling or whatever, the people who are actually responsible there in that situation. So to me, the important thing is that each one of us who are practicing nonviolence need to look at nonviolence being a way of life. And once that happens, then you can see the change happening in the world, in situations, in everything. And you can ensure that that change will be for the benefit of all, because that is part of the way of life that we are looking at. Without that, you know, you can't have real nonviolence or nonviolent way of life. So just as, you know, we are talking about capitalism and communism and all these other philosophies, I think nonviolence is a philosophy. It's a way of thinking. And that is the way of thinking that we have to adopt. So we need to, you know, look at this, you know, amongst all of us and come up with what are the basic principles, what are the basic aspects of nonviolence way of, or nonviolent way of life, and then begin to promote that philosophy, just as people promote these other philosophies. So we need to promote that philosophy. Unfortunately, both Gandhiji, although Martin Luther King has written a lot about it and put it in philosophical terms, but with Gandhiji, he practiced it and he didn't, actually convert it into philosophical terms that can be applied for people. You have to think about them. He didn't put it in concrete terms. So we now have the task of reducing that into concrete terms and then saying, this is the nonviolent way of life. And let's begin to change, begin to look at what the world is. A new way of looking at the world from being, looking at it from a selfish point of view to looking at it from a different perspective. There is a group at the moment who's doing that in South Africa, and they call it Unbounded Organization. So they are looking at something that is different, getting out of that box that we have created for ourselves and looking at life in a completely different way, in a way that the community looks at it, changing the communal view of life, but also taking into account the needs and the, ideas that people have. So bringing all those ideas together and looking at a new philosophy, new way of life. And I think that is what the world needs right now.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Jim back into the conversation as we wrap up this first day. And as he's joining us, I'll share an observation and pose a question to the two of you. Last week was the International Day of Peace. I hold nonviolence as a precondition, as a foundational component to peace. We've had lots of comments in the chat today around peace, and I'd really appreciate if the two of you could respond to the difference between nonviolence and peace and how they're related.
Yeah. Shall I go first, Tom?
Sure.
There's a very interesting study of this by an Italian scholar who points out that the words for peace in both Greek and Latin etymologically mean agreement, arrangement. Now, doesn't that sound like strategic nonviolence to you? Like, I agree not to attack you right now, but just you wait. That could be called peace, quote unquote. In contrast to this, there's arene in Greek and pax in Latin. In contrast to those Western terms, the Hebrew word for peace, shalom, comes from an idea of wholeness, of complete integration of the personality. So it's a deeper term. So I think what we're left with pragmatically in the world today is a term, peace, that can be used or misused. Wasn't it, was it Einstein who said, peace is the deepest longing of the human being? That would be an example of what I call positive peace. And that is another concept that's come up in the nonviolence world and in the disarmament world. Positive peace versus negative peace. Positive peace meaning, well, I'm going to strive for everybody's welfare. Negative peace meaning, I'm not going to shoot you right now. So that's this, Tom, is why I have kind of stopped using the word peace and talk about nonviolence, because at least nonviolence has the advantage that people don't understand it very well. So you're not up against this miasma of misconceptions quite as much as you are with peace.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Ela?
So I've I've always said that nonviolence is not the absence of violence. It's a much bigger, notion than just the absence of violence. And if we look at nonviolence in those terms and look at it as a way of life, then, nonviolence takes on a bigger, a much bigger appearance or position than peace does, because peace can be many things. It can be an enforced peace. It can be a peace that is temporary, like you've said, Michael. It could be anything. It doesn't necessarily mean a way of life. Whereas with nonviolence, it is a way of life, and at the core of nonviolence is love. Martin Luther King has, said that. Gandhiji said that, and it's to change a person with love within that environment of love. So, agape, I think Martin Luther King uses the word agape. And I think that is the important thing about nonviolence. Yes, we can look at positive peace. We can look at other terminology, shalom, as Michael has said. But for me, nonviolence is, it is a much more important, or not important, but a philosophy that can be developed and that can lead to a better way of life for everyone. And so I think that nonviolence is important, because more important than peace.
Welcome back, Jim.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Ella. Thank you, Michael. This has been a very profound and I think inspiring way to start our 10-day program. So I just want to acknowledge the deep wisdom that both of you are bringing to this deliberation of something that's very deep, almost mysterious. It's the deepest part of who we are internally, but it seems to be the most challenging way of being in the world externally. And how we connect those two in a powerful, elegant way is the real challenge before us. So I'm looking forward to the next 9 days. And I thought maybe, Tom, we could you could round us off today as we come to the close of this session by just giving us a description of what's in store for tomorrow.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and as Ela and Michael both shared with us today, there's multiple dimensions to nonviolence, and it's in part why we have the next 9 days to try and tease out each of the dimensions and each of the pieces. And so tomorrow we've got a wonderful group of panelists. The topic and the focus is the legacy: Jesus, Gandhi, and King, nonviolence through the ages. And one of the key points about tomorrow is that while the term nonviolence has only been around for 100 years, nonviolence has a long, long, long legacy. And so we're going to explore tomorrow some of that legacy.
Good. Well, we're looking forward to it. Those are the, three of many avatars out there that have exemplified nonviolence. One thinks of the Buddha. One thinks of Mahavira. One thinks of Lao Tzu. So there's been great, great personages over time that have espoused this basic, very simple notion that we should be kind with one another. look for commonality, be loving, be in harmony with ourselves, with each other, and with the larger environment. It seems like such a simple proposition, but it seems like such a challenging one simultaneously. And in that anvil, human history and human life unfold. So thank you, Tom, for starting this program, Michael, Ella, and we'll see everybody tomorrow. You're all welcome to join the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat box. It's on a different format, a Zoom meeting where everybody can see each other rather than the Zoom webinar, which is more of a broadcast. So Michael, Ella, I hope you can join us at least for a few minutes for that after session chat. And then we'll see everybody again tomorrow, same time, same station for program number 2 on nonviolence. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.